area that is circled potentially for evidence is the area in the white area under the $20,000 mark?
That appears to be where some markings were made. I don't. That's right.
And then finally, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 233. Do you recognize this receipt as the one you found on November 5th of 2010?
Yes.
And does it appear that there are areas that are circled for testing for potential blood?
Yes.
Is the circled area the area in which you believe was tested for potential blood?
Yes.
Oh, and just for the record, what is the date on the receipt? Are you able to see it the way that I have it there? I think I have it too high on this.
Incorrect. That's 10/9 of 10.
So, on or about the day before, well, actually it was the day before the people reported Stephanie missing?
Correct. That's correct.
I asked if all three of those be moved into evidence.
No objection to 231 through 233.
Okay, those will be admitted into evidence.
There's been some testimony related to a bottle of alcohol that was present when Stephanie was reported missing. Did you see a bottle of alcohol within the residence when you searched?
Yes.
And do you remember what kind of alcohol that was?
I collected 3 bottles. One was a Don Julio brand, because I'm not recalling whether that was necessarily, I believe it was tequila. There was a Ciroc vodka bottle and a Sauza tequila bottle.
And were those collected for potential testing as well?
Yes, they were.
Based on your training, was everything collected using gloves to make sure that it remained potential contaminant-free?
Yes, I wore gloves during collection of the evidence at that time.
Just going to switch this out. Throughout the course of your investigation, Detective, were you aware that a diagram had been used using a total, I believe that it's called a total device that does a to-scale diagram of an apartment or location?
I'm aware that was done.
Had you looked at it before today?
No, I have not.
Based on your entry into the apartment, and I won't ask you if it's scale, but I'm going to ask you to look at what's been marked as Exhibit 224. Based on your time within the apartment collecting evidence, does that seem to be an accurate, just general layout?
Yes, it does.
Oh. I didn't ask you this before. Did you become involved in something called pinging of phones?
That would be the term used for initially when we talked earlier about trying to locate the phone. The process is done with the cell phone company to try to communicate with the handset to see if there's any activity in it. Sometimes we call it just pinging, just for shorthand.
Okay, I hadn't asked that before, but oftentimes people refer to it as pinging, and I hadn't asked you for the title of it. During the, just give me 1 second. During the course of the investigation, did you have contact with a woman by the name of Yvonne Wadinsky?
Yes.
And how did you come to be in contact with her?
She phoned with information that she wanted to share.
And was there something related to a knife that she had found?
Yes, there was.
Okay. And where had she found that, if you know?
She found the knife in a boat, which had been stored at her cabin property in Wabeno, Wisconsin.
And did you take that knife into your possession?
Yes, I did.
Did you place it in evidence?
Yes, I did.
And did it remain secure from the time that Yvonne provided that to you?
Once she released it to me, then I secured it into evidence.
Now, throughout the course of looking for Stephanie, we've covered, I think, pretty extensively that as of October 10th of 2010, she had disappeared, and you're well aware of the date that she was finally found, correct?
Yes.
So you were involved in that investigation for almost that full 4 years?
Correct.
Were there canine searches that were done in an attempt to locate Stephanie?
Yes.
And where did those searches take place?
There were several searches around the cabin we discussed in Wabeno. We did search, I'm going to try to go in chronological order in my memory here, but initially it was the Wabeno property, in areas around the Wabeno property. We searched with they're called human remains detection dogs, so I'll just say dogs for short. We searched with the dogs also at condominium, White Spire condominium, which had belonged to, or at one point been rented by Andrea Wadinsky. Yes, I think that's it.
And I think this is coming across a little bit disjointed, so I just want to lay some foundation. Yvonne Wadinsky, she is relevant because she is the mother of who?
She is the mother of Andrea Wadinsky.
And Andrea Wadinsky, who everyone will meet later, becomes relevant because at the time she is the girlfriend and mother of whose child?
Of Kristopher Torgerson's.
The defendant.
The defendant.
Okay. And the first search that was done at Yvonne's property up in Wabeno, is that near the property that Stephanie was finally found?
It is near the location where Stephanie was finally found.
And just for clarity, multiple searches were done with the human detection dogs, and they weren't able to locate Stephanie, correct?
Correct.
There was mention made through Attorney Wilmot earlier that Mr. Torgerson had rented some property through a Get It Now for Mr. Mahomes and Stephanie Lowe. Through your investigation, were you able to confirm that in fact took place?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to some investigation that you were doing on November 2nd of 2011. Were you assigned to collect some telephone calls made by Kristopher Torgerson while he was incarcerated at the Lincoln County Jail?
Yes.
And did you make note of some relevant phone calls that took place during the time frame of October 24th of 2011 to October 28th of 2011?
Yes.
And in one of those phone calls, particularly October 27th of 2011, was there something of note that Mr. Torgerson said to Andrea Wadinsky?
Yes.
And what was that?
He inquired. Do you want me to lay the little bit of context to that conversation?
I would.
Okay. The conversation that I heard was between Andrea Wadinsky and Kristopher Torgerson. Andrea was relating a conversation I had had with her earlier, at which point I told her that we were still investigating Stephanie Lowe's disappearance and that Kristopher Torgerson was still considered a suspect. And Kristopher Torgerson at one point responded to that conversation. He had wondered who had been snitching.
I don't have any other questions.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to try, for the most part, based upon your 40-plus years of work, to go in chronological order on what you did that I have some questions about, and then I'll circle back to clarifying some things that I didn't understand with Ms. Ayala. Fair enough? I mean, you do a lot of phone work. You're kind of the cell phone guy with the department. You know how that stuff operates, right?
I have experience in cell phone investigations, yes.
You did the bulk of the cell phone search warrants and reports, et cetera, in this particular case?
I did several search warrants for cell phone records.
And, I mean, it became important right away. We've already, before you come on today, talked a lot about cell phone records in the case. But for your purposes, I want to ask you, it became really important for you, getting on the case on October 11, 2010, to start analyzing those cell phone records, particularly those of Stephanie Lowe, right?
Correct.
I mean, you want to know who's contacting her and when, right?
That's one of the things that we would be looking at, yes.
In particular, you determined that, I mean, I know later on you find out her cell phone's off based on that emergency subpoena, right?
Correct.
But even before you learn that from Sprint, you learned that her cell phone communication ceases, stops. She's not talking to anybody and nobody, right?
I want to say that it seems to be happening kind of simultaneously, that I'm finding out there's no activity with that cell phone.
Right. I mean, and that helps law enforcement because it helps you figure out when something bad happened to her, right?
It helps us, number one, to determine that there's a potential, if the cell phone is on, it might help us eventually find where she is. If it's off, then we have to look deeper into the records.
In what you found out from your cell phone record work early on, is the last communication from Stephanie Lowe via cell phone came by a voicemail message she left with an individual at 12:58 a.m. Do I have that right?
12:58 a.m. on October 10th is what I remember to be the last outgoing cell phone activity.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't give you the date. Right. 12:58 Sunday, just getting into Sunday, October 10th was the last communication from her, right?
That's the last outgoing activity from that from the number 9255 that was up earlier.
Right. After that time, some people are trying to text her or call her for a while. We know that, right?
There is incoming activity, correct?
And through your investigation, you were able to actually get that voicemail message at 12:58 a.m. You found that communication. It was a voicemail message that she left on somebody else's phone at 12:58 a.m., correct?
We did find that message, yes.
And it was to a fellow by the name of Kelly Wilborn, Wilbourn, right?
I believe that's the spelling. If there's not an E at the end of it, I can't remember. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
There's an extra E in Kelly, Kelley.
Okay.
But that's that voicemail she left, right?
Kelly Wilborn, correct.
And you went and saw Mr. Wilborn, and he provided you the tape of her cell phone message, right?
No.
Objection if we're getting into content. Don't know where that's
Oh,
going.
It's the woman, the victim's last communication at 12:58 a.m. Yeah, I will get into contact text, but it's not for the proof of the matter asserted.
And I would tend to disagree. I think there's a relevance objection as well.
Since the jury out briefly, we can discuss this in court.
At 12:58 a.m., Miss Lowe telephones Kelly Wilborn and leaves a voicemail message saying, "Can you call me back? It's effing important." That's the last thing we hear from the victim in this case. I think that's something the jury is entitled to hear. There is no indication that the defense is going to claim that, and I certainly don't think that communication from Miss Lowe to Miss Wilborn, Mr. Wilborn, indicates that there's some type of Denny issue here, that the defense is going to claim Mr. Wilborn killed Stephanie Lowe. I guess for purposes of your evaluation of this item of evidence, the woman's last communication, it's my understanding that Mr. Wilborn will be called as a witness by the state. He's on their witness list. Maybe they've changed course in that regard. But again, it boggles my mind that this jury doesn't get to hear these types of things.
I don't believe at this point that we are planning on calling Mr. Wilborn. The concern, of course, is that making implications to the jury as to potentially Mr. Wilborn having gone over there, or having been the last person to see her, or getting into the implication that she was afraid on some level. We've been trying to avoid that line of questioning. We have the recording, if the court would like to hear it. It's in one of our clips, but we were not planning on introducing it.
What would that be relevant to?
The woman's activities right before she died. Maybe she's calling somebody for help because she's in fear for her life. other than by Kristopher Torgerson. I really think that if I'm not allowed to enter into evidence and elicit in evidence the woman's telephone calls and conduct and who she's crying out for help to, apparently, within the hours before her death, I really think that's an inability for the defendant to even offer a defense. It seems to me that every piece of evidence, there's substantial pieces of evidence that the defense is trying to elicit, is indicated, well, you're blaming the crime on somebody else. Well, what Denny says is I can't specifically say that Mr. X did it, but I certainly can say, because that's what Torgerson said by his not guilty plea, that somebody else did it. So I am not indicating Kelly Wilborn committed the crime. And if it seems to me, well, there's always that implication. Well, that's going to happen that somebody else committed the crime. It's a little bit more than an implication. It's an express assertion by this defendant that he didn't commit it. So somebody killed him.
I understand all of that, and I understand that that is the defense. And we don't have a problem with, as we've discussed a lot now, that the defense is somebody else did it. What our position has been and remains is that if you are going to specifically name someone else and not say this person killed them, but imply in any way that they could be responsible for it, there just needs to be some earlier litigation and to try to make that connection. We haven't had a problem with Stephanie being in a dangerous lifestyle, Stephanie being potentially afraid, which hasn't really, come in because of the issue that was previously litigated. But I don't think that what the content of that message is relevant at all. And Attorney Wilmoth even said his own words were, we don't know if she was afraid of someone specific other than the defendant because he's claiming that he didn't do it. And the state's belief is that's exactly what that is essentially.
It can offer nothing more.
Okay. Well, based on Denny and Shadell, I'm going to sustain the objection.
So I can't ask this detective. I am not permitted to ask this detective about this victim's cell phone activity the hours before she died.
Contents. Ask about phone calls if you want, but it's the content, and you know what the ruling is on Denny and Shadell. So just say, here's that ruling.
Oh, I intend to, and I have, because I certainly would never even consider doing the contrary.
Okay.
But I
Can we bring it straight back in?
I'm stuck with it.
We need 1 second.
You okay with that?
I think I could be.
Once we avert the stipulation, get to the jury, the county will proceed.
You may be seated.
It's my understanding that before I continue cross-examination of Detective Buckner, Ms. Aiello will relate to the court and to the jury a stipulation between the parties that will allow my cross-examination to continue.
And then with that stipulation, you withdraw your objection?
With the stipulation, that is correct.
Okay.
The stipulation for the court and for the jury is that with the understanding that Kelly Wilborn was not responsible for the death of Stephanie Lowe, the state agrees that the final voicemail of Stephanie Lowe to Kelly Wilborn can be played.
Okay.
So stipulated. May I continue?
Yes, objection's been withdrawn.
You've listened to the 1258 voicemail from Stephanie Lowe to Kelly Wilborn, right?
Yes.
Judge, I'm going to ask if we can play that voicemail now for the jury.
We probably can switch.
Oh yeah, can we switch it to number 2, please?
And how is this identified? Is it number?
We did not mark this as an exhibit 2 of the CD. This might just take 1 second.
Maybe, if it's on there as a quick.
It is on the clock. Sorry.
It's in the video, if it's on the quick, it should.
Maybe, Judge, with the state's permission, I can continue to do some questioning while we locate that?
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. We're going to listen to that, but just so it makes sense to the jury now, you recall it being the following. She leaves this voicemail message, does Miss Lowe to Mr. Wilborn. Can you call me back? It's effing important. Do I have that right?
That sounds correct.
All right. Now, throughout the day of Friday, October 9th, until that early morning hour at 12:58 a.m., there are, by my count, 6 additional phone communications between Kelly Wilborn, who did not kill Stephanie Lowe, and Stephanie Lowe, right? Do you remember that?
I recall there are other calls involving Mr. Wilborn's number. If you have the number there, I don't have it. I don't recall the specific number of calls. But
I do, and if I show you Miss Lowe's phone records, will that help?
yes, if you can also show me that. I believe the number starts with 305.
You have it right.
Okay.
Yes, sir. May I approach, Judge?
You may.
So this is, if this refreshes your recollection, 26 pages of Stephanie Lowe's phone records. And eventually, on this day, October 9th, starts a series of phone communications she has with Kelly Wilborn. You see that?
Yes.
All right. And what is Kelly Wilborn's telephone number?
It's 305-506-7847.
Now, that's, I think, a Florida area code, but the guy lives in Wisconsin, right?
My understanding, he lived in Milwaukee.
And if I were to tell you, you can follow with me if you would. Incidentally, he goes by, got people in the community, in the Wausau community as K, right? Kelly Wilborn?
I've heard him referred to as K.
And it looks like the first communication as between Kelly Wilborn and Miss Lowe is on Friday, October 9th, 2010 at 11:53 a.m.
Without going back into these records, that's the one I'm looking at right now.
And they talked for a period of about 20 minutes, right?
20, that's in seconds, so 1,220 seconds.
20 minutes, 20 seconds by my man.
Okay.
And then Miss Lowe he calls Miss Lowe at 3:45 p.m. on Friday, October 9th, and they speak for a little over a minute.
Okay, I'm showing 10:09:10 start 15:42, or sorry, 3:42 and 3:43. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, I rounded up.
Okay.
Okay. And then Kelly Wilborn calls Miss Lowe at, this one I think I have on the dot, 6:18 p.m. on Friday, October 9th. I got a 4-second call there.
Yes, I see that.
All right, now, look, you know these phone records better than anybody. This short calls like that on phone records, does that probably suggest a voicemail? I don't know, I'm asking.
I don't know with specific certainty based on it says routed call, and
Yeah.
without asking the cell phone company directly, it could be a voicemail, but it could also just be a hang up after it reaches a voicemail. I'm not sure.
Understand. And then 5 minutes later, after that 6:18 p.m. call from Kelly Wilborn to Miss Lowe, she calls Mr. Wilborn, and they talk for a couple of minutes, right?
You're looking at 6:21 p.m. Yeah, is that the one you're looking at?
Talk for about 5 minutes, right?
118 seconds. Good. Yes.
And then the next activity as between these two is,
I can't object, 118 seconds isn't 5 minutes, it's just that. It's two.
Yeah. Just under 2 minutes.
oh, I had it wrong. Oh, yeah, 5 minutes later, they talk for 2 minutes. My notes are wrong, right?
Which one are you looking at now?
So 6:18, they talk for 4 seconds. 5 minutes later, they talk for 2 minutes.
So let me go back and read this. Is 10/9/2010 at 6:18 for 4 seconds is the one you're referring to. The next call is 6:21 p.m. to 6:23 p.m. 118 seconds, so just under 2 minutes.
Then she calls him at 11:30 p.m. that night, correct? And still on Friday, October 9, 2010.
The next one I'm looking at is, again, 10/9, October 9th at 11:30 p.m. for 27 seconds, and that's outbound to Mr. Wilborn's number.
Then she calls Mr. Wilborn again about an hour later. My notes say 12:30 a.m.
Correct?
And then finally we have the 12:58 a.m. call in which voicemail where she says, "Can you call me back? It's effing important." Right? That's the last call.
That's the last call.
So before the call me back, it's effing important, during the course of the prior approximate 12 hours, there is 6 phone calls between these two, right?
I wasn't keeping track, but if you say 6, then we'll go with it.
On November 5, we're done with the phone records, Detective. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, no, one other thing while we're on that. This pinging, explain that to me again.
That's the shorthand term. If we're going to try to determine whether a phone is on, we request the phone company to check. We just call it a ping. I'm not trying to make a reference to an engineering term or what actually goes into that, because that is done on the phone company side.
Okay. Based upon your knowledge of cell phones, you know that if someone is using their cell phone making a call, they're utilizing a cell phone tower, right?
Correct.
And so if someone is using a cell phone, making calls, utilizing a cell phone tower, we can generally tell an area where that person is physically located by the physical location of that cell phone tower, correct?
Yeah, I think we need to dissect that down a little bit. But, so if, this is my understanding, is when the call is connecting to the network or the cell phone tower, there is a sector, there's 3 sectors in the tower. I guess I don't want to get too into engineering term here, but this is just my understanding of it. And you can tell generally what sector communication is in on that tower, but that doesn't necessarily tell you specifically where the person is. Ultimately, it's telling us that the phone is in communication. The handset, physical handset, is somehow communicating with the tower, but the tower can also be communicating with the handset that's on, even though the person isn't actively using the handset.
Right.
As noticed by, if you look at your phone, you can see the service bars on there. In essence, there is some sort of communication going on that's underlying that aspect.
All right, so law enforcement utilizes that cell phone tower activities to suggest where somebody may be physically located with their cell phone, right?
We can take steps to try to do that, yes.
And you can, and
Detached garage inside of that unit.
okay. And that it was a condominium that was on and off utilized by both Andrea Wadinsky with Kristopher Torgerson, right?
Correct.
Okay. And HRDD, we're looking for human remains, an alert by the dogs on human remains, right?
Correct.
Okay. Those dogs also were utilized to see if they'd alert upon the 1995 Jeep Cherokee of Kristopher Torgerson, correct?
Correct.
They didn't alert on anything up in Wabeno, did they? Did they alert positively on the land in Wabeno, the dogs?
I guess the term that I'm told that human remain detection dog handlers use is indications, so there were indications at around the cabin. But when I say around the cabin, I'm referring to, I mean, this Kleenex box is the cabin, the boat was stored sort of adjacent to and in this area, and also associated with the boat that was stored there.
Did the dogs alert indicate on the boat?
Yes.
Did they indicate on any of the contents of the boat?
I want to be clear on your question, because if you say the boat, as I'm standing back, the handlers are working the dog, and so initially the boat is covered, and when the dogs are working around that area, there was some indications from the boat, but then we were asked at some point, I don't know on this specific date, but there's the date in the future that the boat was pulled away from the garage, or from the next to the shed, pulled away from the area, contents were removed, and the dog was then set to work both on the boat and on the contents.
And indicated on both?
I'd have to refresh on that, but I know the dog indicated on, I believe, sections of, or sorry, not sections, but on a tarp that was associated with the boat.
Did the dog indicate on the Torgerson Jeep?
No, the dog did not.
Did the dog indicate on the Andrea Wadinsky van?
I'm trying to recall I don't recall being present for the van, so I believe the van was, I don't recall if if Andrea Wadinsky's van was, if dogs worked that van specifically.
Can you think of anything else the human remains detection dogs gave a look to? Gave a smell to?
Yes.
What else?
The dogs worked an area on, and again in the Wabeno, in the cabin area, but we're not at the cabin anymore. We're within 2 miles probably of the cabin. It's just an approximation. There's 2 forest roads off of a road near the cabin called Elliott Road. So 2 forest roads. I don't recall the name. I don't recall the number of. There's one at the west end of that road that the dogs worked and gave an indication to an area of that road.
Is that where the body of Stephanie Lowe was eventually found?
Not on that road, no.
Now, in addition to the Ivan Wadinsky knife that you presented from the boat, a knife was also found and presented to you from Torgerson's Jeep, right?
Correct.
That would have been found during the processing of the Jeep by a lieutenant in your department named Craig Dunbar, right?
I know that Craig Dunbar released the knife to me to submit to evidence.
Do you recall where in the 1995 Jeep Cherokee the knife was recovered?
I don't recall where he recovered that knife.
Do you recall the date of the recovery being around maybe 2 weeks after Ivan Wadinsky produced the boat knife, March of 2011, but later in the month?
I don't recall that because the knife was provided to me to put into evidence, so the details of it I'm not recalling.
And just for benefit to defense counsel, Craig Dunbar will be testifying if that helps.
Was the knife that came from the Jeep, that was taken into evidence, you maintained it, right?
Correct.
And that knife, just like the knife in the boat that we've already talked about, exhibit number 226, the Jeep knife had those MSC and China markings on it as well, didn't they?
I'd have to look at the knife again to remember that.
The telephone calls from the Lincoln County Jail that you monitored, those from Torgerson to Andrea Wadinsky. You with me?
Yes.
October 24th to October 28th, right? 2011. I'm sorry, I'll change the tone of my voice.
No, I just, you're just...
Are those the dates that you monitored, the 24th to the 28th?
I believe those are the dates.
And then, by that time, law enforcement, had they communicated with Andrea Wadinsky yet about the investigation?
By October 11th, you're saying?
No, here's what I'm asking you. The Lincoln County jail calls were between October 24, 2011 and October 28, 2011. Those that you monitored.
Yes, sir.
I have that right. By that time, Andrea Wadinsky was already communicating to law enforcement, or no?
Yes.
And Torgerson said on October 27, if I understand your testimony right, somebody's been snitching. He tells Andrea that, right? Something to that effect.
Well, he inquired, he had wondered who snitched or who's been snitching, something to that effect.
And he asks that because Andrea Wadinsky is telling him what she's learning from law enforcement, right?
She was reiterating a conversation that I had had with her regarding the state of the investigation.
You are eventually, on November 7, 2011, are going to have interaction yourself with Kristopher Torgerson.
Yes.
During the course of that interaction, you tell Torgerson homicides involving drug trafficking is different than homicides involving crimes of passion. You remember that?
I don't remember, I don't recall that, but it's in my report.
Would it refresh your recollection to review a transcript of your communication with Mr. Torgerson?
That's how it counts with. So, you know, it's on the 7th one?
Would it assist you? Would it assist your, would it aid your recollection of what you would have said to Mr. Torgerson? Because I'm going to elicit something.
Okay. Yeah, it would refresh my memory potentially.
May I approach? I mean, this is, you met with him, I think you met with him at that time with Lieutenant William Kolb. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you met with him for a while such that there was generated about a 74-page transcript. Does that look familiar?
I've seen this transcript.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to review all 74 pages to see if it refreshes your recollection, but I'm going to ask you to take a look at page 53 of the transcript and see if it refreshes your recollection about this business of telling Torgerson homicides involving drug trafficking is different than homicides involving crimes of passion.
Sorry, what page again?
53.
And it's already base number.
Sure. Base stamp would be 3790.
Thank you.
I did make claims, or I did make statements regarding crimes of passion.
Being different than drug trafficking offenses, or homicides involving drug trafficking. Is that what you were expressing there?
I'm not seeing the part where you're talking about comparing it to drugs.
What was the reference to crimes of passion about? Were you trying to say that they're different from other crimes, other homicides?
I can answer your question, but guess I might be concerned about bringing up something regarding why I'm referencing this.
Okay, you should have a second.
No, I'm just going to move on. Did you tell Torgerson, and take a look at page 69 if that helps, that in cases, essentially did you tell him, in cases involving drugs and money, there is no shortage of suspects? Did you and or Lieutenant Kolb, were you communicating that at that time? Well, looks like that was Kolb, right? He was telling Torgerson that.
Lieutenant Kolb says there's no shortage of possibilities here for suspects.
Do I have that right? Is that what he said?
That's what I just read off this transcript.
Because he said that, right?
That's attributed to Lieutenant Kolb, correct?
And then you did a report of interview about this transcript, this dialogue where you wrote, quote, tell me if I got this right. Lowe's involvement in drug dealing was offered by Lieutenant Kolb and I as a potential reason someone may have wanted to harm Lowe. Does that sound familiar?
That sounds familiar.
What page are we at now, counsel?
That was his report.
Okay.
On November 17, 2011, do you recall drafting a sworn statement to a judge in support of an application for a search warrant concerning Torgerson's cell phone number? You did a lot of those. You remember that one?
I recall drafting a warrant for Kristopher Torgerson's cell phone records.
If I were to tell you that was on November 17, 2011, would that be about right?
That sounds correct if that's the date on the warrant.
Trying to get subscriber information, call detail, and cell tower information.
Correct.
And you needed a search warrant from a judge to do that, right?
Correct.
And you have to do an affidavit or sworn statement to the judge telling him or her what the evidence is in support of that intrusion, right?
Correct.
In that sworn statement, you indicated that Andrea Wadinsky had provided information to the Wausau Police Department that you were utilizing in support of that search warrant, right?
I'd have to refresh my memory as to what I included regarding Andrea Wadinsky.
Let me see if I have the warrant. If I were to show you the warrant, would it refresh your recollection?
If you show me the affidavit.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yes.
May I approach to do so?
You may.
Big stamp, 1136 or 1160. I think that was number used.
Take a quick look. That is indeed the application in support of the search warrant for Torgerson's cell phone information, right?
Correct.
And take a look if within your affidavit you have set forth information that Andrea Wadinsky.
Objection, I think this is going to be hearsay, I'm sorry, I just wanted to, if it is, to prevent it before it happens.
It's not. I submit it's not. It's not just. I'm not going to ask for the content of what she said. Okay. Is there information from Andrea Wadinsky on this November 17, 2011 application?
Yes.
Andrea Wadinsky caused you, unbeknownst to you, to present false information, didn't she?
Objection is to relevance.
She's a witness in the case against the defendant.
But I feel like we're going to get into content
We're
based
not.
on that.
We won't. In fact, that's the last question.
Okay.
Could I have it read back?
Question. Andrea Wadinsky caused you, unbeknownst to you, to present false information, didn't she?
Can you specify the information that you're saying is
And
false?
again, now that's hearsay because that's getting into the specific content.
So the answer is I can't. Did you went to a judge with information that you had received from a bunch of people, right?
Correct.
And you said, Judge, this is reliable information because you believed it was, right?
Correct.
Part of that information came from Andrea Wadinsky, correct?
Correct.
And that was false, the information she gave you, right?
I'm not sure which information we're talking about.
Okay, may I approach this?
And now we're getting into content, so it's hearsay.
Well, no, we're not, because it's not going to be offered. He just wants to see what the information is, whether it was false or not. I'm not going to offer the information. Just want to point it out.
I still think it's hearsay, but
How would you like to proceed, Your Honor?
Why don't you just point out what you're referring to and you'll either agree or disagree. And that should be the end of it. Without reading it out loud.
Have you found it, or should I show you?
Show me, please.
Okay. You're right there. Does that refresh your recollection whether she provided you false information that found its way in that application for a search warrant?
No, I mean, there's there's more that occur, but this information here isn't necessarily inaccurate.
Final answer?
If we're talking about the section that you were just up here and pointed to, again, in a general sense, that seems to be accurate, but there's more that ultimately. I'm trying to answer your question, but I'm not sure exactly where we're going.
Can I just have a minute? I'm done. I just got to get this issue done. Well, you've been involved in this investigation for in excess of 4 years, from 2010 in the fall to 2014 and beyond, right?
Correct.
And eventually Andrea Wadinsky changed her story about what she said she knew, right?
Correct.
Prior to that time, did you draft search warrants based upon information from her that was untrue or not?
When I drafted the search warrants, again, if we were going to go back and look at each search warrant to find out what information I used for each search warrant, we could answer that. But in the search warrant you just showed me, in general, it seemed, from my recollection, that what she said was, in essence, an aspect of what happened, but not the full account. I mean, that's.
Did Andrea Wadinsky obstruct your investigation?
Yes.
So,
Your Honor. When Attorney Wilmoth was going through the phone records with you, there was a phone call that Stephanie had made to Mr. Wilborn that was, there was some testimony that was 2 minutes in length, from 6:18 to 6:21 p.m. I believe Attorney Wilmoth asked you, so they talked for 2 minutes. You don't have any knowledge as to the content of the phone call. It could have been a voicemail. It could have been just an extended nothing, but it was just, I mean, the phone lines were active for that long, correct?
Correct.
Now, I know that Attorney Wilmoth didn't play the exhibit, but since we talked about it and we found it, you might as well hear it. It's Exhibit 98 is the recording, Exhibit 97 is the transcript, and you already laid the foundation for it. So with the court's permission, I'll play that. Yes, I'd like those to be moved out.
Which exhibits?
Any objections?
What numbers?
97 and 90, well, 98 is the CD, 97 is the transcript.
So both.
Yes to both.
Okay, any objection?
no, sir.
Okay, they're received.
This is it. Oh. Is your volume on? Is there a volume control up there?
I can hear it really faint.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can hear it too, thank you.
your volume over there.
I might have to turn it on the computer.
remote.
It appears to have been. This is working yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, working fine when we tested it. Apparently we won't try and change the volume on the others.
Sure. I might have fixed it. Is that the same message that you were aware to have existed as the last message that Stephanie Logan left?
Yes.
Attorney Wilmouth had asked you some questions related to the alcohol bottles that were swabbed, and you were not able to remember if the bottles had been sent to the crime lab. The attorneys were present along with you for an evidence review that took place a couple months ago, correct?
Correct.
And all the parties were given a sheet of all the evidence, an evidence log, as routinely kept by the police department?
Correct.
Would it refresh your recollection if you looked at the top page of that evidence log to see if those bottles were in fact sent to the crime lab?
It might, yes.
I don't need to see that.
And again, this is just to refresh your recollection, so when you're done, let us know.
The evidence log indicates the crime lab did analyze the bottles and the swabs.
And we'll probably get into this tomorrow, but do you recall receiving information on these bottles that in fact no fingerprints were found on any of the bottles?
I remember the information on the swabbing results.
Okay, so well, we can talk about that tomorrow, but so you don't recall having seen any fingerprint results?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
We've got a separate. Page 69.
I want to talk about the pinging for a second. Has pinning changed since 2010?
I don't know how to answer that question. I know the cell phone company still has the capacity to communicate with handsets and determine activity, determine potential location.
And I guess the reason that I'm asking is technology does advance over time in general, correct?
Correct.
And so, because I am technologically inept, this will help me understand as well. Attorney Wilmot was asking you some questions. A person can only be located if they're with their phone and the phone is on, correct? Or can it also work when the phone is off?
No, my understanding is that the phone is off, then it's off, and there's not a signal, and there's not communication. We cannot make a determination as to any location.
And if the phone is on, even if a person isn't actively on a call, it can still be located, correct?
The phone itself, correct?
Okay.
Potentially.
Attorney Wilmot got a little bit into the HRDDs, or the Human Remains Detective Dogs, and we had talked a little bit about that on direct. Kristopher Torgerson, at the time of this incident, was driving a Jeep Cherokee 1995. You have knowledge of that?
Yes.
And the dogs did not locate anything within that Jeep, or indicate on anything, I should say.
Correct.
And do you have training in that area to understand what levels of cleaning would make a dog indicate or not indicate, even if there was something there? Do you have knowledge or experience in that?
Not direct knowledge, no. Not direct training, I'm sorry.
Okay. But these are dogs. Do you feel comfortable saying that dogs aren't 100% on their indication? Sometimes there's remains where they don't indicate. Sometimes there are no remains where they do.
There's not a 100% proposition on that, correct?
Attorney Wilmot referred you to talking about crimes of passion. You had a conversation later about, well, shortly thereafter, about drugs. Is that accurate?
After the
crime of passion conversation was, I don't want to say a separate conversation because it was very close in time, but it was a separate topic. You weren't directly comparing the two, correct?
I don't recall specifically that aspect of the communication in terms of the comparison or what the flow was with that.
But I believe he went through this with you in the conversation you were having with Mr. Torgerson. You indicated, I think in this situation, we have somebody who is involved in the dope business and anything is possible.
That sounds correct.
And that's true. Anything is possible.
That is correct.
And Mr. Torgerson, based on your part of this investigation, was heavily involved in the dope business as well, correct?
My understanding is Mr. Torgerson was involved in the dope business.
Attorney Wilmot brought up the comment that Lieutenant Kolb made to Mr. Torgerson during that same interview later on, and he elicited the quote, "There's no shortage of possibilities here for suspects," correct?
Correct.
And that wasn't the complete quote from that particular portion, was it?
I believe there was more in that section.
And you don't remember it off the top of your head at this
No, I
point?
do not.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at the Exhibit 216?
Yes.
Mayor?
Mayor?
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
What was the remainder of that quote?
You want me to read it?
Well, we haven't admitted it into evidence, so I'd rather you not testify from it. If there's no objection, I'd ask for it to be moved into evidence, and then we could read.
Any objection?
No.
Okay, transcript, 216
Yes, 216.
is received.
Go ahead.
Starting at the beginning of that section from Lieutenant Kolb, it is, there's no shortage of possibilities here for suspects, okay? You've kind of risen towards the top of the list because of things that he's already brought up to you. So, unfortunately, it just, Chris sitting here saying I didn't do it isn't quite, we need to take your story, understand what you are telling us. You did that night, but we want to look and try to corroborate things independently. So that helps verify that you're telling us the truth right now.
Thank you. And then finally, Attorney Wilhelm, we had talked about the conversations that you were listening to from Mr. Torgerson while he was in the jail, correct?
Yes.
And the conversation that you listened to between Mr. Torgerson and Ms. Wadinsky, when Mr. Torgerson was indicating that he wondered who snitched, was that because Ms. Wadinsky had told Mr. Torgerson that he was a suspect still?
It sounded like that was the flow of the conversation. That was the reference, or that Mr. Torgerson's response was in reference to the information shared by Andrea Wadinsky about his position in the case.
And that's referring to the disappearance of Stephanie Lowe?
Correct.
I don't have any other questions.
Any requests?
Just so the jury isn't confused, sir, the voicemail message that they heard had some reference to some hour other than 12:58. That hour was on the voicemail message or records was actually just the time Kelly Wilborn retrieved it, correct?
I do recall that deviation, but I don't know the reason for that. When I recollect the phone call, my recollection is going off the actual call detail record provided by Sprint.
I'm not up to anything. I just want to make sure this jury isn't confused. The call was at 12:58 a.m. from Stephanie Lowe's record, not another time, right?
Correct, that's my understanding.
That's all I wanted to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, take a break here for about 15 minutes.
If there's any evidence that I haven't asked to be admitted, I'd like for it to be admitted. I think we covered it all. We can cover the exhibit numbers if you want to make that.